Chapter 2, understanding a little bit more about economics and the impact that it has on businesses. Some of the things we'll be getting into is the conditions that affect it, looking at the differences between free markets and command markets as far as the economics is concerned, and the move towards mixed economies, and then understanding the overall U.S. economic system. Now, when you think about what economics is basically the study of the money, okay? How is it that we choose to use our resources to produce goods and services and get them and consume them and things like that? Macroeconomics is looking at the economy as a whole. Microeconomics is looking at particular markets. Also in economics, you have the idea of resource development. What is it that we're doing to increase the use of our resources more efficiently and more effectively? Now, a guy by the name of Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. And one of the things that he said in there was, we need to have freedom in order for the economy to actually work. We need to be able to own property, to keep the profits that we have. And if people have those opportunities, they're going to be rewarded with profit. The thing that he included in there that really focused in on was the idea of the invisible hand. In other words, what he's saying here is, with the invisible hand, you have a particular business and you want to do something and you earn money by selling crops, let's say. If you hire more people, you can grow more crops. And if you can grow more crops, you can sell more to the community. And if you're selling more to the community, you can make more money. And you've actually helped the community at that point because they have more food, and the people that you hired because they now have income. Capitalism is that whole idea of the factors of production are privately held. In other words, you can start a business whenever you want, for whatever you want. Now, there's 4 basic rights that go with capitalism: the right to own property, to own a business and keep those profits. You can compete, and you have the freedom of choice. You can either sell certain things, you can make certain things, you can compete in certain markets, or not in all of those. Roosevelt also included 4 additional, in other words, freedom of speech, worship, freedom from want and fear. Now, a free market is basically saying, okay, consumers want a particular thing. Somebody's going to see an opportunity there, and they're going to provide that. Now, the thing is, there's a price impact in there. In other words, consumers are only going to be willing to pay so much for some of those things. If there's a lot of folks who want that particular thing, the price is going to go up because they're willing to pay more for it because it's scarce. If there's a ton of that stuff out there, then the price will go down. You see that happening today with gasoline. Right now, we're in that COVID-19 situation where everybody's in lockdown, nobody's driving, nobody's using up gas. Consequently, the price of gas has dropped tremendously because there is a glut of it out there. There's plenty of supply. People are trying to sell it. Nobody's wanting to buy it. So the cost of gas is actually dropping quite a bit. During back some time ago, like during the 80s, there was a situation where there was a real scarcity of gasoline. And what was happening was the price of gas was going up like crazy because more and more people wanted it, but there wasn't quite the supply. So let's say that we're looking at somebody who wants to sell t-shirts, okay? You're going to have this idea of supply and demand, and the idea of a market price, which will be the equilibrium point, where the supply that you have will be consumed by the amount of demand that's out there for that particular price. Think about it. If you're making t-shirts and you might sell a few, be willing to sell a few at about $5. But if people are willing to pay $50 for them, man, you're going to produce the heck out of those things because you're going to be making all kinds of money on that. The thing is, the people who are buying the t-shirts, if you're going to sell them for just a couple of bucks, man, they'll buy the heck out of it. But if you're going to try to sell it for $50, hardly anybody's going to buy any of that. So when you put the two of those together, where those two curves cross is that equilibrium point. So in other words, a price of 15 bucks, all right, what's going to happen is you're going to sell on average 25 of those things a day. The thing is, if you try to raise your price to $20, you're not going to sell nearly as much. So where these two cross is that equilibrium point, and that is the price that people will be willing to pay and what you'll be willing to sell your wares at. Now, you do have competition within the free markets. You have perfect competition where every firm has identical products, everybody has perfect information, they know where it's at, things like that. And so what happens is you get a very equal price all the way across. Monopolistic competition is where you have a lot of firms out there and they have same, maybe similar products, but what they're doing is they're differentiating those products. They're not substitutes, they're differentiated. An oligopoly is where you have just a small number of firms and where maybe one of the big guys can really make an impact as far as the market is concerned. With a monopoly, you have one firm that's dominating everything. They can set the prices that they want, whatever they want, and that really becomes a problem. You have some benefits and limitations when it comes to free markets. With the benefits with free markets, you have that open competition, and it gives people the opportunity who are poor to work their way out of poverty. Again, they have the opportunity, not a guarantee. The limitation of it is you may have people who let greed get to them. Okay, and there have been various situations of that in the news in the past. Now, socialism is basically where some of the basic businesses are owned by the government. And what they're doing is they are trying to set the prices and distribute any kind of profits and things like that. You can have some entrepreneurs out there, but they're not going to be running the big businesses. Citizens are highly taxed. Whenever you're talking about socialism, there's huge taxes that go along with it. They sit there and they say, okay, we're going to have free education, free healthcare, and things like that. The issue with that is you're going to have to pay for it through your taxes. And so under socialism, what happens is your paycheck is actually much less because of all of the taxes that are taken out to give some of these so-called free benefits. Negative consequences, you have fewer incentives for business people to take a risk. They're not going to take a risk. Why should I take a risk if the government's just going to take all my money? And then you have that brain drain. You're going to lose the best and brightest. And if there isn't the incentive to put in the money to create, do things, new inventions and things like that, people aren't going to do it. Now, communism is basically a political system where the government owns everything and they're setting all of the prices and they're saying, this is what you can buy. We're going to tell you what it is and how much you're going to pay for it. That leads to lots and lots of shortages. Now, China is a communist country. And at one point, China, they had their 5-year plans and they owned all the stuff and they told everybody, okay, this is where you're going to work and things like this. One of the things they did with like all the farmers, they gave them all a little plot of land where they could do their own thing. They had to work on the collective, but in their spare time, if they had any, they could work that little plot of land. One of the things that they found was those little plots of land that the farmers could call their own were outproducing the collectives. And so that whole idea of that profit motive really does kick into gear that allows people to really produce and find new ways to do things. Now, you basically have free market and command economies. Free market is basically the competition aspect, the economic systems where you have the goods and services and people compete. Command economies are things like communism and socialism. Now, there's never been a perfect economic system. All economic systems have some problems. One of the things that's happening, though, is a lot of the socialist governments are cutting back on the social programs because they're finding that the profit motive isn't there. They're starting to stagnate. Capitalist countries are starting to increase a few of their social programs to take care of more people. So that what's happening is you're getting more of the mixed economies where you have a mixture between capitalism and socialism. Now, in the U.S. economic system, one of the things that you'll hear about is the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is the total amount of all the goods and services that were produced over a certain length of time. You can see that the United States has had big growth as far as the GDP over time. And there are a lot of countries that would love to get the level of GDP that we have. The thing is, because we have more of that mixed and more of a capitalist system, we are able to utilize that whole profit motive and really improve our gross domestic product. Now, in economic systems, you're going to have unemployment. Unemployment is basically where you have people who are looking for work and they cannot find it. They've been out of work for at least 4 weeks. You can see that the unemployment rate has changed over time, and it goes up and down, basically based on the business cycle and the things that are going on. Now, recently, our unemployment level was running around 3%, 2.5% to 3%. Economists consider that full employment. And the reason is because you're actually going to have a mismatch between the skills that people have and the jobs that are open. Right now, the coronavirus issue is out there. A lot of people are having to stay home. A lot of businesses have had to close their doors. And right now, you have a huge uptick in unemployment. When you start thinking about unemployment, there's basically 4 types. You have structural. Structural unemployment is where there's a mismatch between the skills that people have and the jobs that are open. Cyclical unemployment is where you have unemployment based on the business cycle. In other words, you have a recession, you're going to have some unemployment because companies are laying off. Seasonal unemployment, that's based on just, you have the Christmas holidays coming up, and a lot of people are working part-time in retail and stuff. After that, you get a lot of layoffs. So you'll have some seasonal unemployment. Frictional unemployment is where you have a mismatch where people have the skills, but they're making changes. Now, some of the indicators to think about: inflation, disinflation, deflation, and stagflation. Inflation is where you have a general rise in the price of goods. Disinflation is where the price is still rising, but not as quickly as it was before. Deflation is where prices tank. Stagflation is where the economy is still going down, but prices are still going up. Another thing you'll hear about is what's called the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI. That's basically a basket of goods and what it costs to produce those goods. And you're talking about, food and housing and furniture and things like this. Inflation is basically, when they measure inflation, it's the CPI less food and energy costs. And the reason for that is because they have a tendency to really vary quite a bit. Productivity is going up in the United States due to the technological advances that we have. In the service sector, in other words, in particularly the nonprofit sector, one of the things that they're looking at is quality and not necessarily quantity. In other words, you think about social services that you're providing. Are you providing good quality services? You also have the business cycle to think about, because every economy will go through a cycle of boom and down, bust. You have economic booms, you have recessions, where you have some declines in the GDP. A depression is a severe recession that might last for, maybe several years. And then you have recovery. Our United States economy will always recover because of the profit motive. Fiscal policy is how the government will try to keep the economy stable based on their spending. The thing is, with the spending, you're going to get what's called a deficit. Okay. In other words, the country is spending more than what they're taking in. If you think about what our national debt is, let's say when it hit 20 trillion, now it's actually gone up over that. Take $1 bills stacked up, it would go over 1,350 miles. Now, monetary policy is how the Federal Reserve tries to manage the economy, basically raising or lowering interest rates in order to improve growth or reduce growth. So those are some of the key points from the chapter. Give me a shout if you have questions.